Good afternoon. This is Professor Aminah Al-Deen with Critical Talk on what is increasingly a critical talk every day. We have watched and listened to Kenosha. We have been reading and watching something called Vigilantism. We have wondered about young men being able to walk the streets with AR-15s and other what they're calling euphemistically long guns, which are technically something else. But we're wondering, all of us are, how the Oval Office can support vigilantism. What is going on? Are people just now going to get shot down in the streets by people who claim a right to the Second Amendment, the right to bear arms, which doesn't say you have the right to kill people wantonly? But how are we going to manage all of this? We're also looking back again in the West Coast, in Oregon and Seattle. We're looking at protests in various places, wondering, week before last, it was sending in the National Guard. Now, I don't know if one needs the National Guard because we got vigilantes everywhere. Is another group of vigilantes going to rise up to oppose the group of vigilantes that are now here? Today, to discuss this and the law, I have Professor Joseph Margulies, who's a law professor at Cornell University, and he's the author of a forthcoming book, Now Get Out. As I love that title. It's about transforming distressed neighborhoods. So better hurry up and get out because we need to know that before winter comes. And let me welcome you this afternoon. I mean, I'm scared to turn on the news to figure out what, after our wonderful person in the Oval Office took himself to Kenosha and didn't speak about what caused all of this, but spoke to the people who caused it. I am so confused. Help me out here.
These are dark days. I was just saying to a colleague today, we've gone beyond partisanship to the incitement of violence.
Right.
It's one thing to disagree. Now the disagreement takes the form of armed violence, and it is not merely enabled by the president; it is encouraged. There's a reason why he went to Kenosha. It has nothing to do with condolences for Jacob Blake's plight and his family. It's to fan the flames of angry, heavily armed, white, mostly men, who are increasingly prepared to take to the streets and confront protesters with violence. It's a dangerous time.
Well, this article that you recently, just a hot minute ago, posted in the Washington Post, the title is Vigilantes Claim to Preserve Law and Order. Their true goal is to save whiteness. Provocative title. Talk about it.
They hide behind the Constitution, and they hide behind public safety, and they hide behind protecting property. I think what's really going on is a fear of whiteness being eclipsed, its hegemony in the United States being replaced as a cultural matter, being replaced as a demographic matter. It won't be long before we're a majority-minority country and that whites are in the minority. And most importantly, being replaced as a political matter. right? So a major rallying cry of the Trump administration now is to waive the prospect of a Kamala Harris presidency, right?
Are you serious?
I'm sorry, say again?
Are you serious?
Oh, yeah. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Vote for President Trump. You don't want to face the prospect of a President Harris. As though Joe Biden were just a placeholder, and everybody knows that the real purpose of the left, the radical left, is to set the stage for, heaven forbid, a black woman in the Oval Office. The terror that exists within a certain fraction of whites about being replaced has fueled this vigilantism.
You know, that is so scary. I'm not sure I know what to do with it. You know, I would never.
And I'm sorry to interrupt you, but you know, we have almost exactly 2 months before the election. It's going to get worse before it gets better. It's going to get worse before it gets. We're not at the peak yet, or the trough, however your perspective is.
But explore that a little bit. What does the peak? I mean, what does it look like in these next 2 months?
I think that the president knows that there are more people against him than for him. And, you know, the polling seems to bear that out. And so it depends on him getting an extremely high turnout of his supporters. That's probably not enough. That's why there are that's why there is this rhetoric about attacking ballot by mail, voting by mail, in order to suppress those who might vote without going to the ballot box. And, you know, and then you have the advantage built in for Republicans in the Electoral College, which is what led, you know, President Trump to be president, even though he got several million fewer votes than Hillary Clinton. I mean, you know, he's looking for the structural advantages that he can, and that depends on a really energized, angry, frightened white base.
But if he gets rid of vote by mail, white folks who live like in Florida in retirement homes, can't get to the mail, are scared of the virus, can't vote.
If he succeeds he won't. But the ambition is to, you know, essentially disenfranchise millions of potential voters. That's the ambition.
You know, this is, it's so scary here. You know, I was just reading today this article about Russia chiming in, and then some friends of mine call me. We're all getting these calls. They have English, you know, they sound like everyday American, but what they're talking about is crazy. And a couple of times you get these Chinese calls where they forget to turn on the translator, and so you just delete them. But these calls are coming in, and I would say about every 5 to 7 minutes, talking about how bad Biden is and that he's communist and that black folks will suffer if you vote for him.
Yeah, and in states that are remotely in play, you're going to get a lot of those. There's a lot of money available, and you're going to get a lot of those.
Wow.
We have 2 months. It's going to be bad for 2 months. And there's going to be a lot more violence, I fear.
I want to go back to your article on Kenosha, because in the article we're talking about this narratives that says houses are more important. I mean, businesses, structures are more important than people. So that you move to protect the structures. You know, if people get shot in the meanwhile, that's okay. But also, what is behind the law? And you cited in the article a court case. What was it, Heller versus something or the other?
Right, Heller.
Yeah.
Heller is the 2008 decision in the Supreme Court that established the private right to gun ownership under the Second Amendment. Now, it's not an unlimited right. Of course, municipalities can regulate the right, but whether they choose to regulate it is a political question, one that different municipalities in different states answer in different ways. So, for instance, every state in the country has some regulations, right? So you can't you can't own a gun if you have a prior felony. And in most jurisdictions, you can't take a gun into a church, or you can't take a gun into a public school. Not every, but in many jurisdictions, that's the way it is. But on the street, Wisconsin is one of the states, it's majority of the states are, where it's called open carry, which means you can carry a gun openly, short gun, long gun, semi-automatic weapon, without a permit. You don't need a permit. Now, you're supposed to be 18 years old, and Mr. Rittenhouse, if he in fact is guilty of shooting those protesters, was only 17. Mm. But the fact is, there were a great many other people just carrying guns openly, perfectly legally in Kenosha.
I need to take a break here. Can we take a break? And I still want to come back to some more about Kenosha. Thank you. We are back. In the article, can you, for our audience, give the facts of what happened to Joseph Blake as you know them?
The police in Kenosha were called to some kind of domestic disturbance, from what I understand. Mr. Blake was not involved in the disturbance, but was present. And at some point, it should be said, Mr. Blake is a young Black man. He was there with his car. His children, 3 children, were in the car. The police had confronted him. It seems the police were trying to control the situation, and were doing it with their guns drawn. Mr. Blake, apparently, because his children were in the car, walked around his car to his driver's side door, opened the door, and then with his back to the police officers, one of the officers shot him 7 times in the back. Amazingly, he didn't die at the scene. He was transported to the hospital. He is in the hospital. For reasons I don't understand at all, he was handcuffed, and his foot was cuffed to the bed, or his leg. He has apparently been paralyzed as a result of the gunshot wound. I don't know if you knew this, but Mr. Blake has a Chicago connection. I used to live in Evanston, and he attended Evanston Township High School. I was talking to one of my former neighbors who said their daughter was classmates with Jacob Blake. He went to Evanston.
Wow.
Yeah, I didn't know that either.
Well, what enables a policeman, even if he had been involved in a domestic dispute?
Right, exactly. Even if that were true. He wasn't, but even if it were true.
Yeah, to shoot you in the back 7 times.
So I don't know very many people who are defending what the officer did in this case, and it's a hard one to defend. I mean, the law is an officer can use lethal force when they feel they or the lives of a bystander are in danger, when they're facing immediate peril. It's very hard to watch the tape. And I force myself to watch these tapes. They come out over and over again, and I force myself to watch them because if I'm going to talk about them, I want to do it based on having seen it with my own eyes. It's very hard to watch it and understand. This was a bad shooting. It's very, very hard to describe, or not to describe. It's hard to watch, but it's very hard to justify. Sometimes when the police use lethal violence, it's a justified shooting. You don't want to suggest that every time they fire a weapon, it's unjustified, because that's just not true.
Right.
This one certainly seems that way, and it was a bad shooting. So,
one excuse was the tasers, 2 different tasers didn't work, and he was going after a knife we later found on the floor of his car.
Yeah, you're right. I've read both of those things.
And I'm saying, okay, but you didn't know the knife was there.
And we should say they don't know that he was going for it. He could easily have gone. He was going to because he was concerned for the welfare of his children.
Right.
I mean, look, the police ought to be trained. No, they are trained in the use of less lethal force. There was nothing that justified the immediate escalation to the highest level of force, lethal force, right away. Mm-hmm. Of course, they had options, and it's they didn't use them, and they should have.
Well, this policeman, to my reading, has only been taken off of active duty. He hasn't been arrested. He's still getting paid. What's going on here?
Different municipalities handle things differently. In Minneapolis, after George Floyd was murdered, they acted against Derek Chauvin very, very quickly. They fired all 3 officers very quickly and charged Derek Chauvin very quickly. The conventional response, however, is to just create an administrative leave. The person's put on administrative leave, which means they're suspended, if you will, but they're still going to get paid. They're still while the investigation is unfolding. I actually, I'm not as concerned about that as I am about the welfare of Jacob Blake and what followed. Let the investigation run its course. And take action against the officers if it's appropriate. But for me, the bigger question is, why does this happen? Well, why does this happen over and over again? And over again.
Yeah. Well, why?
Yeah, right. Why?
No.
So we've known about police violence for a long, long time. We know the bias that's built into. We know that what people see, right, when they look at a young Black man, they see danger, they see violence, and so innocent conduct is interpreted as threatening, and many officers in that setting are unfortunately quick to overreact. And that's the problem. That's the origin of it.
Well, one of the things that police are talking about is the fact that they should not be called to handle every kind of social disturbance, from the mentally ill person that they have to shoot. And all of us agree with that.
Yeah, that's right. I agree.
But
that's the major point. That's that. What you've just described is a major reason behind, or the logic behind, the defund the police, right? So I saw something recently, and I thought it was very well put. We train the police to be warriors, and then we ask them to be social workers, right?
Exactly.
Both those things are wrong. Both those things are wrong. Don't train them to be warriors, and don't ask them to be social workers. If you got a social work problem, send a social worker.
Right.
And now, if we don't have money for social workers, well, that's why we defund the police. We pay the police to do that which only the police can do. And there isn't a lot. There isn't a lot. Only pay them to do which the police can do and no one else can do. Right. And you know, if it's responding to a person who's homeless, whose crime, if you will, is that they're sleeping on the street because we don't have houses and we don't have a place for that person to go and we don't have jobs, that's not a police officer's job. That's a different job. And so a large overrepresentation of mental illness and substance abuse disorders among that group, right? So then you've got a person who may be frightened of the police, maybe had prior bad experiences with the police. You're just setting up the possibility of friction, of disaster.
Right. But how do we, now that we've trained the public to dial 911 for everything, how do we untrain them to, I mean, even in some, I was talking to somebody from LA, and they took $250 million back from the police, who have a budget of more than $2 billion. And I'm trying to figure out how did they get all that budget. But anyway, took back, they gave them $250 million, which what I hear won't touch the kind of support they need to have for social services, mental health care workers.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah. I don't, it's defund. I think the thing that's left out of that sentence is defund the police to give more money to those auxiliary social aids that need it.
Yeah, and you're right. And look, and just in case you thought that sentence weren't worrisome enough, it's even more dangerous now. Not dangerous is the wrong word. It's even more imperative now, because city municipal coffers have been hit so bad by COVID.
Yeah.
Right? So the resources that are available in municipalities to do the work that's required in distressed neighborhoods, where you have this is where COVID has hit hardest, right? In Black communities, in brown communities, in poor communities all over the country. That's where COVID has hit hardest. That's where the essential workers are, who aren't taken care of. This is who have lost their job, who are at greater risk of infection, are least apt to be able to do their work remotely. This is when cities have to step in and provide those resources. I mean, you've got folks who are standing in line for hours for a bag of food in the United States of America because they can't afford to go to the grocery store, right? Lines that run for miles and miles to one food bank, right? So the level of distress and the disconnect that is getting worse between the people who, you know, they can work remotely, they're fine, their money's in the stock market, they've more than recovered, you know, happy days are here again for them. And the majority of people, that's not how their life is. It is just today, United Airlines makes its home in a major hub in Chicago, laid off over 16,000 workers. I mean, these are very difficult times.
Yeah, I was thinking about that because, you know, there isn't going to be any more shipments to food pantries. All of the moratoriums for those who don't have federally backed mortgages, which is something they can do something about if they can refinance, there's no money. All the moratoriums are up. So we're going to have lines of people with no food. And we're going to be stepping over people in the streets?
Yeah, the risk of a just tsunami of evictions.
Right.
Some estimates put the number of possible evictions by the end of the year at 30 million people, which is a staggering number. Right? That's every man nationwide, 30 million people. That's every man, woman, and child in every state. You know, like the lowest populations, the lowest 16 states in population. Right. Every single person, right? Rhode Island, Delaware, Wyoming, Nevada, Montana. Just take every single person who lives in those states, kick them out onto the streets. That's the crisis that we may have by the end of the year if we don't have renter protections. It could be just horrific.
So I'm going to take another break, but when we come back, I want to see if you think those conditions will spur more vigilantism and a rise in gangs, perhaps confronting the vigilantes. Let's take a break. So how do you think, because we're reaching a really critical point, housing, food shortages, we don't know that the pandemic has ended. We have vigilantism, and we have on the other side of the vigilantes, and I guess they are a sort of vigilante, gangs who are fully loaded. This is a mess.
This is a mess. And just before the break, you asked, you know, is it gonna continue? Is it gonna get worse? The vigilantism is ostensibly the ostensible driver of it is the protests, the overwhelming number of which are peaceful, but they are invariably portrayed as violent and destructive.
Right.
And they act as a kind of siren call to vigilantism. I mean, in fact, the vigilantes in Kenosha, after Jacob Blake was shot, and protests started to happen, a vigilante group called the Kenosha Guard put out a posting on Facebook saying, "Come and defend the city from these thugs."
Yeah.
Word. And so, given the economic conditions that we're in, given the reality of systemic racism, I expect that the protests will continue. And so, therefore, the vigilantism will be there to meet it, to incite violence, armed violence. And as we saw in Portland, sometimes that will be met with violence. So if you were asking me, well, what do you expect for the next 30 days? I expect more of the same and perhaps worse. and encouraged by President Trump. While a small fraction of the population that has its money tucked away in the stock market is going to be, living in their house in the Hamptons, and life's good for us.
We have a comment from our audience that says, beside Trump, what aspects of American society promote vigilantism, and how did it come to be that murdering protesters is seen as patriotic?
Well, I mean, those questions get to the core of what's happening. The first part of it, what aspects of American society promote vigilantism? There are a number, right? Vigilantism itself is driven by the fear by a group of that their place in society is slipping away, right? Mm-hmm. Their membership in a group is suddenly imperiled. They no longer feel secure in their place, and that's what's happening with a certain fraction of the white population. They feel that they no longer, the country is no longer theirs, right? In a multiple profound set. I know why. Look, this is how they feel. This is how they feel. Okay. So that's the sort of the core. People call it white grievance, but that doesn't really get at the sense of terror that they feel. Right? It's not just a grievance, right? It's not just a complaint. Mm-hmm. It's really a sense of being just forgotten, left out, losing their place. Mm-hmm. And then you add to that the ready access to guns. Right? It can't happen without this very, very easy access to guns. And the demonization of the protesters as contrary to everything, right? They're not merely protesters who are exercising their First Amendment right to demand equality, to demand racial equity, to demand a fair and just system. That's not who they are. They are portrayed as attacking the very citadel of the American system. They are predators. So they're demonized. Well, what do you do with demons? Well, what demonization does is it creates the moral authority to you're doing a service if you eradicate demons, right? You're a superhero if you eradicate demons. And so people don't think of themselves as shooting protesters. They think of themselves as defending what is great in American civilization. That's their self-conception.
But two of the protesters or people that Rittenhouse shot were not Black.
Oh yeah, that's true. But one of the beautiful things. Take a look at Portland. The folks who came down to as the exciting thing in the wake of the murder of George Floyd is the way, if you could say one good thing came out of it, is the way the idea of Black lives and the movement for Black lives has become, people who are protesting on behalf of Black lives are not just people of color anymore.
Right.
And that's a really wonderful thing.
It is.
Yes.
And they're shooting everybody. I mean, this vigilantism that has no hold to it is really, really dangerous. The fact that the president is pushing it, supporting it with his rhetoric, he can go on Fox TV with that knucklehead that's an anchor, and they can say, well, why shouldn't these vigilantes go out there and protect property? Because now the police and the leaders are no longer able.
Right. It's a real, it's an encouragement. It's an incitement to violence. It's a really dangerous thing. It's a dangerous thing.
So how are we to begin to strategize, to post everywhere, to talk everywhere? You and your articles in the Washington Post. How are we to strategize to make people aware of the fallacies of the argument? The media doesn't seem to understand nuances and subtleties, and that they must dig. So I'm really distressed with the media. How are we to begin to strategize?
You know, there will be time for us to strategize long-term solutions for the housing crisis and the loss of good jobs and the widespread presence of food scarcity and the fact that, you know, we don't take care of a significant fraction of our population
Right.
every single. There'll be time for that, but in the immediate term,
Right.
what we all need to recognize is that if we don't get this man out of office, it's going to be even worse for a great many people. Right now, we have to put all differences aside. Look, let me be honest with you. Joe Biden was not my candidate.
Yeah.
Joe Biden is not a progressive. Joe Biden was not my candidate. But right now, I will vote for him and I will support him enthusiastically.
Right.
Because 4 more years of Donald Trump could very well destroy this country. A lot of bloodshed, a lot of bloodshed.
And that's why, you know, when we think about the uptick in violence and all of this stuff, we're either going to have people sitting on the fence who will buy the rhetoric, or the people who stay home.
Nobody can stay home. No one can say, well, you know, it doesn't really affect me. Well, you know, I got a good job. Oh, well, people are exaggerating. Nobody can say any of that. Maybe you could say it 4 years ago and you didn't really know what this man was about. Now we know. Everybody's eyes should be open. Young people have to come out. You know, maybe he's not Bernie Sanders, but understand, he has allied himself with a lot of the Sanders campaign.
Yeah.
He, you know, the first order of business has to be reclaiming the White House. And if you think that, you know,
and the Senate,
I live in a blue state, it's going to be safe, or I live in a close state and, you know, everybody knows Trump is going to steal it by this device or that. No, get your butt out the door and vote.
Yeah. And
no alternative.
You know, that Senate is treacherous.
Yeah, that's right. You know, look, now more than any time in decades, your vote really matters. It is a precious, precious commodity in this cycle, and you've got to exercise it.
Everybody here in Chicago, I mean, and it's very interesting. Some people have bought the rhetoric that both sides are bad. Bernie Sanders was my candidate, and I'm looking at Biden who come out of his house, and Trump who's supporting vigilantism and calling people, as he usually does, out of their names, and holding conferences on the. Why, I don't think I've ever seen a political campaign thing held on the lawn of the White House, you know, even by the incumbent. But he's breaking every rule in the book. There doesn't seem to be anything to stop him from breaking every rule in the book, which gives some people the sense that this is our man. He'll break every rule that we thought shouldn't be a rule.
Right. That's right. Some people, look, he knows what he's doing. And some people, precisely because the behavior is inappropriate, that's why he does it. That's not a reason for him not to do it. That's why he does it.
Yeah.
Because there is a certain fraction of his base that just loves it. Yeah. But meanwhile, you know, these are institutions that he's trampling on. This is a constitutional structure that he's trampling on. This is the lives of poor people that he's trampling on. Millions are suffering to support the ego of this narcissist. It's a dangerous time.
I think that's a new word in many people's vocabularies. They said, well, if you don't understand the definition, look at Donald Trump. That's narcissism.
That's right. That's narcissism. It's all about him. It's all about him.
It is.
People, thousands of people are dying. 1,000 every day are dying because of COVID. And he says, this is just an attack on me. This is just unfair to me. It's unfair to you. You're surrounded by doctors. Everybody who comes within, 5 yards of you has to be tested. You're the safest man in America. What do you mean it's about you? What about these people what about the poor woman who has to get up at 5 o'clock in the morning, board public transportation, to go work at a job that's dangerous in the food industry? She makes barely more than minimum wage, works all day, and has to bring her money home to support her family. She can't get sick. She doesn't have insurance. Well, right. What about her? That's who it's about, asshole. Sorry.
And COVID is the fault of the Democrat.
Right. COVID is right.
They put a virus here.
Look, as much as he wants to deny it, the truth still matters. And we know the record is clear. He dismissed it. He denied it. He denigrated it. He suggested it was nothing. He still says, it'll just disappear. His handling of the pandemic has been
horrible.
Horrible. Just a complete abdication of his role as a leader. I don't know why we would have expected anything else. There's nothing in his history that leads you to believe he's qualified to do that. And he showed his true colors.
That is true. But we have to take one last break. And then when I come back, I want to see if you see connections between what's happening in Kenosha, what's happening in Portland. And I know that there are other protests going on that they've kind of the news. So when we come back, just think about if you see any connections. Thank you.
Sure.
Hi, we're back again. What connections do you see between the Portland situation and Kenosha and anywhere else that they're trying to dampen down the news with regard to protests? Sending in the National Guard, the mayor of Portland tore Trump a new one the other day, and I have to admit I applauded. I was so happy I was beside myself. What connections do you see, and is he going to use this in his law and order campaign?
Oh yeah, this is his campaign. This is the core. This is what he's running on. This is Richard Nixon, 1968. Someone just posted a little note. Of course, there's a connection between Kenosha and Portland and Seattle. Yeah, and she's right. That's exactly right. There is a connection.
Yeah.
Injustice has been rampant throughout the country. That's the reason why the protests after the murder of George Floyd. And of course, it's not just George Floyd, right? There's also Breonna Taylor and there's Ahmaud Arbery down in Georgia and too many others. And one should always remember that. That's why it resonated throughout the country, right? It's not like it was a Minneapolis phenomenon. It's not like this only was happening here. People recognized that any city could have been where George Floyd was killed, right? George Floyd was murdered everywhere. That's in fact why it resonated beyond the limits of this country. It was an international phenomenon because people watched and they saw, this is my backyard. This is not just Minneapolis, right? And then so when Jacob Blake is shot, it is a match that lands on already hot embers, and so it flames up quickly, and that happens everywhere. It's not limited to one part of the country, and unfortunately, neither is the call to vigilantism. That's going to be everywhere.
Well, do you think? I mean, that the angst and anxiety and depression in some instances over the pandemic, the uncertainty of what's going to happen in a pandemic. And then when you get to stick a toe out the door, here comes protest. Has that put us, I've skipped the phrase new normal. Are we at a new America?
Wow, that's the right question to ask. Is this the new America? Mm-hmm. I might be naive. I am often accused of being naive, but I don't think so. I think if you tell me if I wake up November 4th and this man's still in office, I don't know. Then I might have a different answer to this question. Mm-hmm. But if we can get him out of office and get back to a place where behavior like we have seen in Kenosha, the vigilantism is no longer celebrated. Right. You don't want to discount the effect that he has in fanning these flames. And if we turn it around and make it, if the Republicans take a huge drubbing in November so that they recognize that this man that they made as their standard bearer dragged them down. They're political actors. They don't want to tie themselves to a 100-pound weight that just drags them under the water and drowns them. On the other hand, if it doesn't have that effect, they're political actors, and they'll, as they have, see what they've done for the last 4 years. They have converted the Republican Party into the party of Donald Trump. And if they're rewarded for that, then it'll get much worse.
But what does that say? That he was so easily able to convert? I mean, even if you didn't like all of the things that the Republicans stood for, you could kind of list some of them. Now why did they let themselves get converted into the party of Donald Trump?
Well, I mean, what people say is they looked around and they say, yes, he's a jackass, but he won't be around forever. And if I go against him, I'll lose my seat. And if I want to do any good, I've got to wait him out. And I think that's a mistaken calculation. I think that they're wrong. I think that it's craven. I think that it's an embarrassment. I think it's spineless. And I think history will judge them harshly. The Republicans who caved, history will judge them harshly. But I think that's the calculation. And most people seem to think that, if he just disappeared from the face of the earth tomorrow, if he died of a heart attack, very few people would shed tears. At least very few elected Republicans would shed tears. That's what people say. But who knows if that's true? What they'll say out loud is, he's our man. So.
Good God.
Yeah.
I mean, it's all just so disheartening. And I know that people are trying to find something to latch on to. And his rhetoric, when you're anxious about food and housing and everything else, even though he hasn't done a damn thing for you, gets to be attractive. If I can grab a gun and go out and shoot somebody to protect property in a state I don't even live in, and it doesn't matter whether if you're 17 or 77, you're getting hyped up by social media. It's really, really, really scary.
It is.
And what's going to happen next?
And for me, I agree with that. And for me, what is most, just as a matter of my own personal philosophy, and I think I've talked to you about this before, I don't believe in demonization. My personal philosophy is there is no them, there is only us. It's 8 words. There is no them, there is only us. And so I want to believe that everybody, including the vigilantes that are out there threatening protesters, are all us. Even Donald Trump, he's just us. I don't wish anyone ill. I just don't wish anyone ill. But I'm very worried that the flame is so hot and there's no room but for demonization now. That's my concern.
Well, I'm going to give you, and I can't thank you enough for giving me some more of your time, but I'm going to give you the last word.
Vote. That's it. One word. Vote.
Period and vote. Period
Vote.
and vote. Well, I can't thank you enough. And since we're both predicting that this is going to go on, and I know you're going to write some more articles, I'm probably going to ask you to give me some more of your time in the very near future. I mean, we only have I don't believe November 3rd got here this fast.
2 months from tomorrow.
Oh my God. To all who are listening, I want to thank Professor Joe Margulies for spending 50 minutes with us on Critical Talk, and hope to see you again. And please be safe and be well.
Be safe. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.